Hello everyone, this is the 33rd video of my database management systems practical video series. In the previous video, in the previous two videos, we continued a question series and today I'm going to continue the same question started from two questions before. So without further ado, let's go to our database management system question list. Here we completed the 32nd question. Now it's the 33rd question. Okay, here's the question. This is the same context we read in the previous question. Let me show you the database here. If you remember the previous video, we created an ER diagram here. It's not completed yet. We have to establish the relationships between these tables. So today I'm going to do that part. So let's read the questions and answer for those questions. Here I'm not going to read the old context again. Let's move on to the first question. Okay. Record the relationship between user and user type in the ER diagram. Okay, now we are going to create the relationship between the user table and the user type. Okay, let's go to our ER diagram here, and this is the user table and this is the user type table. If you remember the previous videos, we separate some informations about the same user in separate tables to avoid the unwanted redundancies or unwanted duplications when we enter data into this database. It's called normalization. And now we are going to establish the relationship between these two tables. Okay, before that, I like to show you a new feature. Actually, this is not a new feature, but it's a very productive feature in MySQL Workbench. It's the layer system here. This is the button you can use to create a layer here. You can I click on this button, new layer at selected area. Now we can select an area here. For an example, this one, you can see it create a rectangle here with a color. Now we can easily identify some set of tables here. As an example, I selected these tables. These are the tables related to storing the users data here, and these tables, in the previous video we created this set of tables, and in the previous video we used these tables to store the details of the product. So we can separate the details of the user table from the details of the product table. And also we can rename this layer here. You can right click on the name of the layer and edit new layer. Now we can change this layer to user data or user. Okay, like that we can easily identify this table using here you can see this is the bird eye view, and also you can use this bird eye view to identify some set of tables which records same data. Okay, now we can establish the relationship between these tables. And also you can see when I move this layer, the whole set of tables inside this layer are moving with this user data layer. Okay, that's another feature comes with the new layer at selected area feature. Now we can create the relationship user type and user table. You can see we can store user types. As an example, there are three types of users which use this system: employees and suppliers and also admins, like that. And we can store those names or user types in this table, and we can use these IDs, use type ID, to identify a user's type recorded in the user table, which is the main table. So there can be many users with the same user type, and if we watch from the user table angle, at the user type table, there can be only one user type to a single user. So there's a one-to-many relationship, one here and many to user. Okay, now I'm going to select the non-identifying one-to-many relationship here. Let's click on this button, and here you can see the many relationship. The table which have the many relationship should click first before the the table which have the one relationship. So user table is the table which have the many relationship with the user table. So I'm clicking on the user table here first, and then user type table. You can see the ID of the user type table appeared in the user table. That means it foreign from user type table to user table. Now we can also edit the name of the foreign key here. I'm editing it to, let's change it to user type ID. Okay, this is the name, user type ID. Okay, we established one relationship here. Now let's go to the second one. Record a relationship between user and gender in ER diagram. Okay, now let's go back to the ER diagram. Here, user and gender, it's also going to be the same. We can store the names of the genders like male, female, or there can be an option for other genders, and many records in this user table can have the same gender, because there can be users with same gender, but a single user can have only a single gender name. So there's a one-to-many relationship between gender table and the user table, and user table is the table which have the many relationship, and then the gender table. So you can see I established the second relationship, and now we can change the name to gender ID. Okay, here we complete the second part here. Now let's go to our question again. Record the relationship between user and system login in the ER diagram. Okay, now this is the system login table, and this table only records the details or credentials of the related to the login of this user. But there's a very important part to highlight. There can be users without access to this system. That means they can see some data in the system without logged in, like customers. It's not necessary to give them a credential to log into the system, because they are only here to buy some products. But there are some specific people who we have to give access to specific parts of the system, like employees and the admins, like that. If we put these credentials of the system login in the user table, when we enter data, we have to give all the users a system login credential. But in this case, we don't need that. That's why we store those details in a separate table, because we can link those details, or we can give this system login information to a specific user. So that's why we use a separate table to store system login details. And again, there's another part to highlight. It's the user. A single user in the user table should only have a single login, and also a single login should only have a single user. That's the relationship. That's a one-to-one relationship. Here you can see this is the tool we use to create this or establish this relationship non-identifying one-to-one relationship. Now there's no order to select. You can select any table here, but you can see there's no point to store the login ID in the user table. That way, when we store the details of the users, we have to give them all the we have to give them a system login anyway. In this case, we have to store the user's ID in the system login table. So there can be a specific set of user IDs in the system login and not all the user IDs in the user table. So let's click on the tool here and then click on the system login table and then the user table. Okay, now you can see the user ID fall into the system login table. Okay, now let's change the name here. User ID, and that's the relationship between system login and the user table. Now let's go back to the question. Record the relationship between user and address in the ER diagram. Okay, let's go to our ER diagram here. Address table and the user table. So there can be users with many addresses, so there's a many relationship to the user table, but there can be only one address to a single user, so one relationship to the address table. So let's click on the non-identifying one-to-many relationship here, and then the address ID in the address table should fall into the user table. So let's click on the user table first and then the address table. Here you can see address ID fall into the user table. Now we can change the name to address ID. Okay, now we completed the relationship between the address table and the user table here. Now let's go to the next one. Record the relationship between address and city in the ER diagram. Okay, here this is the city table, and you can see in the address table there are only a specific set of data like number of the address and the street of the address, street line 1 of the address, and then the street line 2, but there is no city here. It's because we have to store the names of the city. We should not give permission to enter the city of the user every time someone logged in. Someone storing the user details. We have to store the city names in a separate table and use those names to identify the address of the user. So that's why the city is in a separate table, so we can store the names of the cities, and we can create a standard to identify or enter a city name, and we can use those city names to identify the cities of the users from their addresses. Okay, so you can see there can be addresses with same city, so there's a many relationship to the address table, and there can be an address. The address should only have a single city, so there's a one relationship from the address table to the city table. So there's a one-to-many relationship here. I'm going to click on the non-identifying one-to-many relationship, and then address table is the table which should have the city ID foreign from the city table. So let's click on the address table first and then the city table. Okay, you can see the city ID foreign from the city table to the address table. Now we can edit the name to city ID. Okay, now we establish all the relationships in the user data area. Now we can move on to the product details area. Record the relationship between product and brand in the ER diagram. Okay, let's go back to our ER diagram here, and before establishing the relationship, let's group or create a layer around these two tables. Okay, here I select the new layer option and then product table and the brand table. Okay, now we can change the name as product details. And also we can change the color to this one, like this one. Okay, and now let's establish the relationship. You can see product table is the main table which contains the details and other tables. The brand table, JIAT table, stock table, like other tables, they are created separately because we normalize this database. So it will reduce the unwanted redundancy or duplication of data in this diagram. And here you can see there can be products with many brands. So there's a many relationship to the product brand from brand to product table, and every single product should have only a single brand. So there's a one relationship from product table to brand table. Now we can establish this one using, we can use this button here, non-identifying one-to-many relationship. And here product table is the table which should have the product ID foreign from the brand table, brand ID foreign from the brand table. So I click on the product table first and then brand table. Okay, here you can see brand ID foreign from brand table to product table. Now we can change the name here to brand ID. Okay, here we completed that part. Now let's move on to the seventh part. Record the relationship between user and JIAT in the ER diagram. Okay, here's the JIAT table, and I explained about this table in the previous video when we created this table set. JIAT is the good receive node, and that node will created, or that node is meant to be meant for the suppliers and the details about the goods required for the store is stored in this JIAT table. So it's a relationship between the suppliers and the shop owner, and user table records the details of the suppliers and also the employees and all other kinds of people. So there should be, you can see JIAT table, there can be many users with many user IDs. So there's a many relationship to user table to JIAT table, and only a single user should here in the user table should exist. There should only exist one user which have the connection to JIAT table. So there's a one relationship from JIAT table to user table. So let's establish that relationship too. But before that, let's create a layer around this table like this one, and also edit the name as JIAT details. JIAT details. Okay. Also, we can change the color here. Okay. Now let's click on the non-identifying one-to-many relationship, and here JIAT table should be the table which contains the user ID foreign from user table to this table. So let's click on that table first and then the user table. Okay. So there can be users, there can be many users mentioned in the JIAT table who has the relationship to the whose data is recorded in the user table. Okay. Now Let's go to our question set, and we completed the 7th part, and let's go to the 8th part. Record the relationship between JIRN and JIRN item in the ER diagram. Okay, if you can remember the previous video, there are two tables related to the good receive node. First one is the JIRN table, which is the main table, and it contains only the date of the JIRN node generated and also the user whose address from that JIRN node, and also the JIRN ID. So there can be many products mentioned in the JIRN node, not only one product. There can be many products required for the store and supplied by a user. So we can't store those details in a same table because it will increase the duplication, the unwanted duplication of data, and we can store only the product details and the quantities in a separate table. So here's the JIRN item table. Let's put that in this JIRN details layer here. Now we can establish the relationship between these two tables. I told you there can be many items listed in a single JIRN node. So there's a many relationship from JIRN table to JIRN item table, and a single item should exist in a single cell, single record at a time. So there's a one relationship from JIRN item table to JIRN table. Before doing that, let's change the name of the user ID in the JIRN table. I forget to do that. Okay, now it's complete. Now we can establish the relationship here. JIRN ID is the data which should foreign from JIRN table to JIRN item table, and it can be iterate or duplicate. So let's click on the JIRN item table first, and then the JIRN table. Okay, here we establish that relationship too. Now we can change the name to JIRN ID. Okay. Now we completed this part, the 8th part. Now let's move on to the 9th one. Okay, note the relationship between JIRN item and product in the ER diagram. Here you can see in the ER diagram, it's not enough to store only these details: unit price, selling price, and JIRN ID, and also the quantity. Sorry, this should be changed. You can see the quantity is automatically selected as the primary key, and that's a wrong arrangement here. Now let's change that one. Let's uncheck this primary key. Actually, by default, when we create tables using when we create tables in MySQL Workbench, it automatically assign the first attribute as the primary key. So that's why the quantity was the primary key here. Now we corrected that part. Now we can establish the relationship here. You can see that there's no details about the product and the product details, so we have to establish the relationship between the product table and the JIRN table. And you can see there can be many products, or there can be the single product recorded in several times in the JIRN item. So there's a many relationship from product table to JIRN table, and also there can be only one product exists in the product table which have the record which can be recorded in the JIRN item. So there's the one relationship from JIRN item to product table. So let's establish this part. You can see the product ID should foreign from this product table to GRN table. So let's click on the GRN item table first and then the product table. Okay, here you can see the product ID foreign from the product table here. Now we can change the name to product ID. Okay, and we completed that 9th part, and let's move on to the 10th one. Record the relationship between GRN item and stock in the ER diagram. Okay, in the stock table, I explained this one in the previous video. We use stock table to maintain detail about the quantity and the selling price, the recent quantity and the selling price in the stock of our store. So we should put that detail in our GRN item or good receive note when we address a supplier. So the product details, the stock details should foreign from the stock table to GRN item table. So there's a many relationship because there can be many stocks with the same quantity and selling price recorded in the GRN item table. So there's a many relationship from stock table to GRN table, and also there should be a stock detail recorded once in a single record, and there can be only one stock ID in the stock table corresponds to that record. Okay, there's a one relationship from GRN item to stock table. Now we can establish this one. GRN item table should be the table which have the foreign key from stock table. So let's click that one first and then the stock table. Okay, here we establish that relationship 2, and also we can create a layer around the stock table, and we can name that one as the stock details. Stock details, and also change the name. Okay, now we can change the name of the foreign key in the GRN item table as stock ID. Okay, we completed that part. Now let's move on to the 11th one. Record the relationship between user and invoice in the ER diagram. Okay. An invoice table or invoice is the statement which will generate when a user purchases some item and paid for that item. Here's the user details. So we have to put that details in the invoice table. Before that, let's create a layer around these two tables, and it contains the invoice details. Invoice details. Okay, and this is the invoice details area. Now we can establish the relationship. You can see there can be a user can purchase more than one items and also purchase them in several times. So a single user ID can duplicate in the invoice table. There can be multiple records with the same user ID. So there's a many relationship from user table to invoice table, and also a single user ID recorded in the invoice table should exist in the user table once. So there's a one relationship from invoice table to user table, and also we can establish this relationship using the non-identifying one-to-many relationship, and also the invoice table is the table which should have the user ID as the foreign key. So let's select that one first, and then the user table. Here user ID foreign from the user table here. Now we can change the name to user ID. Okay, and we completed this part. Let's change the color to a more lighter one. Okay, and then here's the 12th one. Note the relationship between invoice and invoice item in the ER diagram. Okay, here you can see in our ER diagram, as the JIAT details, we created a invoice, and that invoice can contain more than one product, about more than one product and the quantity. So there's a many relationship to invoice item table from invoice table, and a single item or single record in the invoice item table should have a single invoice ID, and also we have to foreign the invoice ID to invoice item table. So there's a one-to-many relationship. Let's establish that one. Invoice item is the table which should have the invoice ID as the foreign key. So let's click that one first, and then the invoice table. Okay, here invoice ID foreign to the invoice item table. Now we can change the name. Okay, here's the connection or relationship between invoice table and the invoice item table. And let's move on to the last one of this question setting. Record the relationship between invoice item and stock in the ER diagram. And here you can see the stock table contains the details about the stock in our store, and when a user purchases some items with these quantities, here you can see those quantities are recorded in the invoice item table, and if we foreign the stock details to the invoice table, we can calculate the difference between how many quantities are in our store and how many quantities are purchased by users. So for that purpose, we can establish the relationship between stock table to invoice table, and you can see stock detail, a single stock detail can iterate or duplicate more than one time in invoice table. So there's a many relationship from stock table to invoice table, and in the invoice table, a single record should record only a single stock ID. So there's a one relationship from invoice item table to stock table. Now let's establish that relationship using non-identifying one-to-many relationship, and stock ID is the data or attribute which should foreign from stock table to invoice item table. So let's click on the invoice item table first, and then the stock table. Now we can change the name here to stock ID, and we completed the 33rd question of our question list. Okay, now I think that's it for this video. I will see you in the next one. Thank you very much for watching.